Well, hello again, everyone, and welcome to our latest webcast that we're bringing you from Travel Weekly as part of our Roadmap to Recovery series. And I am joined today by Andy Harmer, the Managing Director, UK and Ireland of Clear, and also the Chair of Clear in the UK and Ireland, Tony Roberts, who is, of course, the Vice President of Princess Cruises for the UK and Europe. So welcome, gentlemen. Thank you for joining me. Now, it's been an incredibly tough 15 months for us all, particularly the cruise sector. But we are now just over a week away. Exciting that we're going to be getting ships back into the water. This is obviously for the UK cruises only, but it's still a big step. But I thought, Andy, why don't we first just talk about the last few months of what you've been doing as Clear, take stock of where we are and in relation to that sort of domestic restart.
Sure, thanks, Lucy. Yeah, it's been a challenging 14 months, I think, for the whole travel sector and cruise. But in the cruise sector here in the UK, we really used the voluntary suspension of operations to work on some protocols. And those protocols were for return to service. And we developed those in conjunction with Port Health, with Public Health, with the government, but also alongside Clear and EMSA and the EU Healthy Gateways within Europe. So by the end of October, we had produced a UK framework document for the resumption of cruising. And that really was one of the most collaborative things that I think we've ever done as a cruise sector here in this country, because it brought together all of the experts from within the industry to develop these protocols for that return to service. And as you say, we're now just over a week away from that return to service, which is great for the cruise industry, great for our travel agent and tour operator partners, but also great for the other supply chain companies that rely on cruise. So the destinations that we visit, plus the ports and the suppliers to those ships, etc. So it is an exciting time. The government revealed a couple of weeks ago, now it feels like a long time ago, that domestic cruising could restart alongside domestic tourism. And so May the 17th is, of course, the date that domestic tourism can open. So an MSC Cruises with Virtuosa will be the first ship that sails under those new regulations.
There's very few that actually are going to start, as soon as they can. I think MSC might be a couple of days after that, May the 20th. But why are most of them? I mean, Tony, you're one of the lines that are going to be doing it, but most of the lines are, holding back. Is it just because it takes a while to get ready to get your operations back up and running? Because I think you're a little bit later, aren't you?
Yeah, so we're not starting until the back end of July at Princess Cruises, but it is, from our perspective, it was, we wanted to take a bit of time, and actually it does take some time to get together crew and to get them trained and to get them all onto the ship and then to start to operate again. And I think, each of the cruise lines is taking a slightly different view or a different approach to that. And we were very keen not to jump the gun or go ahead of the government changing guidance, which, happened really at the start of March. And it is genuinely a 2 to 3 month period to take a ship from where they are now with very few crew on them to being able to operate with guests on board again. And there's an awful lot to go through. So the key thing here is getting this right and making sure that everybody understands the new protocols and is really clear on everything that they need to do. And I think some cruise lines have been operating a little bit longer in Europe, like MSC is a great example, where I think they were a little bit further along that journey than others who've been, had ships really out of action for 12 months.
Yeah, fair enough. And Andy, you mentioned the release of these protocols in October, and at the time, I spoke to you and some of your colleagues, and you were talking about how that would probably evolve over time. And I think it's fair to say we probably hoped that cruising would restart before now. We were probably hoping it would be up and running. So how much has changed since October? Have they been added to? Have they been lessened given the vaccination rollout? Or what's happened with that list of protocols?
Yeah, so as you say, the protocols were written in a way that they could be updated. It's very much a live document. And the situation around cruising has changed. So the epidemiological situation at the end of last year, beginning of this year, was very challenging in the UK. Europe has been in a slightly different place, on a slightly different trajectory. And, there are similar challenges around the world. But one of the things that happens at Clear is that those policies and protocols are reviewed constantly. And of course, they have to be in step with the UK regulations. So, for example, We are within step 3 from May the 17th, subject to the Prime Minister announcing that, and they will be in place through till that June 21st date when new regulations will come in. So we have to fit in with the UK regulations, but we also have to learn from best practice as well. As Tony says, cruising resumed in other parts of the world towards the end of last year. We've had almost 400,000 people taking a cruise. And so we're continuing to learn and evolve as that situation, as more people take a cruise, then we continue to learn best practice. And I think one of the great things about the cruise sector is that close collaboration within the sector, which means that we share best practice. So, all of those experts around the world all working for that safe resumption of cruising.
Yeah. And Tony, then just remind us then, for picking up on what Andy said about the UK rules, I think there's a maximum passenger number for the first month or so, isn't there, from May the 17th up until June the 21st, when restrictions are lifted more generally. And then I think even after that, there's going to be sort of some restriction. Most lines aren't going to sail at full capacity, are they?
Yeah, so as Andy said, we're very much in line with the UK government guidelines around indoor spaces. So initially from May 17th through to June the 21st, there'll be a limitation of 50% of capacity or a maximum of 1,000 guests. That doesn't include crew, but that's in place just as it would be with any leisure facilities within the UK at the same time. So stadiums and things like that will be under the same restrictions. So it's in line with the government guidelines. Then if when the announcement changes on the 21st, then hopefully, we step away from that. But as you said, there'll still be some restrictions around social distancing and things like that will mean that the cruise lines will be unlikely to operate at full capacity initially. And also, just from an operational perspective, there's new protocols and processes to manage, and we need to make sure that we're well equipped to do that. So, in line with the phased return that we've talked about throughout this, I think there'll be a phased return to full occupancy that will be managed over over several months, and it'll maybe a while before the ships are back to being 100% full.
And then obviously, one of the things that's been possibly a bit confusing, I guess, is that the lines, whilst you're all clearly collaborating and following similar protocols and following government guidance, lines have got different policies in terms of whether they're vaccinating all of their crew, whether they're vaccinating, you've got to be double vaxxed with 2 weeks or double vaxxed with 1 week, or whether you're going to allow children on board who haven't been vaccinated at all, and then the testing. I mean, there is still a fair bit of complexity. So why is that happening?
So I think each of the lines are developing their detailed processes and protocols in line with the guidelines. And from a clear perspective, throughout we've talked about taking a multi-layered approach rather than relying on one measure, such as making sure that everybody's vaccinated. It goes much further than that in terms of the processes and the protocols that are going to be in place. So then each of the lines, I think, takes a view on what is it that their guests are asking for, and certainly the vaccination policy that we've put in place at Princess has been driven by guest feedback primarily to say, this is what we would like when we go on holiday, and also looking at other things that are going on. And each of the lines is, of course, entitled to make their own decisions within the framework about how they operate.
And I think the only thing I'll add to what Tony said was that, if you think about a global cruise industry, we're very much a global industry. We operate in multi-countries. Our crew come from multi-countries. Our guests come from multiple countries. And the vaccine rollout is at different stages in different countries. So we've had a successful rollout here in the UK. Of course, we've been one of the fastest to roll out vaccinations. So we need time for vaccines to become more generally available, but also for the global industry to reflect that.
Yeah. And do you think that some lines will change their policy throughout the summer? I mean, I say that because I was joking saying, I would like to take my children. And then they were like, you never know. By the end, things might change and we may allow children on board. So do you anticipate, there's no specifics there, but a particular line, but do you anticipate some of the lines changing their policy and perhaps allowing families on as they start operating and they see how things work?
So I think, Lucy, Andy's already talked about how much changed between October and March in terms of when we put the framework in place. And then when we worked with government and got to the point where we were talking about resuming sailing from the 17th of May. And I guess it's pretty clear that this is the situation here is continuing to evolve all of the time. So it's really difficult to predict exactly where we're going to be in 2 months, 3 months, 6 months' time. But I think the one thing that is for sure is that we will be acting on the latest information, the latest science, and following the results and the guidance that we get from government. And that will be what really guides us how these policies evolve over the coming months. And I think all of the cruise lines are watching very carefully as new guidance comes out and as the UK government revises their own policies and approaches, and then adapting to fit that. And I think that will continue over the next 6 to 12 months.
Okay. Interesting what you said about reacting to what your customers want, because we ran a story this morning at cruise.co.uk. I don't know if you've seen their survey of 6,500 customers, and more than 85% of them said that they're having the whole, all passengers, all crew vaccinated was really, really important.
Yeah, I think we're seeing more and more stories, particularly with travel companies, talking about the importance of vaccination. And I think, it's very much, the success of the vaccination rollout in the UK, I think, has given us all a lot of confidence, because we've seen, the positive reports from cases and so on, and how it's really helping us to drive that path out of the pandemic situation that we've been in for the last year. So it is really positive, but it's not the only thing. There are a huge number of protocols in place around testing, social distancing, mask wearing, the bubble shore excursions. There's a huge amount of things that on top of vaccination that are going to help us to navigate through this safely.
So let's just pick up on tests. There's loads of stuff I want to talk to you about, but just on the testing, this is at embarkation. Most lines are saying they want you to come with a negative test. Just to be clear for everyone, because obviously we're talking a lot about testing in international travel, whether it's a lateral flow, whether it's a PCR. So what is the cruise requirement, Andy?
So the clear requirement is that every guest has a negative test before embarkation at the start of their cruise.
And is that's an NHS lateral flow test?
So we're following the same guidelines as applies to testing for pre-departure testing. So there is a bit of freedom there to choose which test is most appropriate for the guest and for the operation as such. But a negative test is required. And then on board, there's the normal, testing, ongoing testing, temperature checking, etc., as part of that wider protocol set. And our crew are also tested multiple times before the start of the cruise, as well. So before a cruise starts, crew and guests will all have had negative tests.
Mm-hmm. And it's worth pointing out that you mentioned, Andy, that how many cruises have actually taken place last summer in the Mediterranean, etc., and Singapore, and there have been ships sailing with passengers, and often from countries that haven't had really high vaccination rollout. So they've been using these other sort of measures. So and there haven't been loads of cases, or certainly no real incidents that have come to light.
No, you're quite right. We saw cruising resume in parts of Europe, in the Mediterranean, in Asia, etc. So we reckon around or just under 400,000 people will have taken a cruise. We also think that, based on publicly available information, less than 50 cases have been reported for those 400,000 guests as well. So clearly the protocols are working. We've seen them in action since July. We continue to build on them and reflect on them and share the best practice from them. But I think, clearly that multi-layered approach is benefiting that cruise operation.
Which must lead to some frustration then that things haven't opened up any sooner, but we'll come on to that. Before we move on from the ex-UK sailings, just remind us then, it's something like 18 ships. There's a lot of people who've come into sail in the UK. I think, Tony, you were one of the first to announce, and then an awful lot of lines followed suit. So, there are some people saying it's going to be very crowded, and I've spoken to some lines who are like, we don't want to get involved in that because it's too much. So tell us, just remind us how many lines are going to be in UK waters this summer.
So that's a good question, actually. I don't know exactly the number of ships, Andy. Have you got that?
It's about 18, yeah.
Yeah, so you're right, Lucy. The Princess was one of the first lines to announce the return to the UK and to doing these UK cruises. And I think we've seen some fairly steady demand through this. There is a lot of capacity, but there's also a huge market in the UK for guests who want to sail also from the UK ports. And I think, as we work through the coming months and the evolving guidance on summer holidays and things like that. And a lot of guests, I think, thinking actually I want to stay close to the UK this year. I definitely think that there's going to be enough guests to fill all of these ships, and we know that the cruise experience is really going to be exceptional, and they're going to enjoy all of the experiences that they would normally enjoy on a cruise. It really is a resort style holiday with fantastic food, drink, and entertainment all included within the price. So,
and of course, a lot of the cruise ships are not even calling anyway, are they? So it's not like we're going to have, I think if people are worried about it being overcrowded, I mean, a lot of them are just sailing around. They're not even making ports of call.
No, absolutely. And, so you've got this fantastic floating resort at sea, but also where there are ports of call, the ports themselves will have restrictions around the number of ships that they can have in. So it really is only going to be like it normally would be in a summer around the British Isles, with calls at Liverpool and Greenock and Belfast and other ports. And some of those ports can maybe take one or two ships, but that's all they ever would have been able to take. So it's going to be quite a similar experience in the ports as well, I think.
And I think one of the other exciting things about those ships is that 4 of them have never had guests on before, so it's their inaugural season. So actually, in terms of the customer choice of ships this summer, not only do we have all of those great ships that many Brits will be used to, but we have those 4 new ships as well. So it is going to be a really exciting summer.
And Tony mentioned there was some good demand. Is it really sort of, loyal cruisers who are just desperate to get away on a cruise wherever they can? Or have you managed to, I think one of the things we said when all these sailings were announced, we were like, well, it's great because we can showcase cruising to people who have, don't want to or can't get in because there's like lack of availability, isn't there, in sort of staycation market, or this is something that they may not have considered and they're actually trying a cruise now. Have you been able to track that at all?
Yeah, I think so. So interestingly, this follows the sort of pattern that we would see normally when we put new product or a New Year's cruises on sale, which is that you have this initial period where all of your most loyal past passengers book, because they're just dying to get back on board and start to, they want to be the first to experience it and so on. And we certainly saw that here with hugely busy first few days of past passengers saying, get me back on board, as soon as possible. What we've seen since then actually has been a really strong new to cruise and new to brand contingent booking. And I think this has been typical across the industry, where people who perhaps haven't considered a cruise are finding some of these short cruises a great opportunity to try it for the first time. And we've also seen a lot of travel agents really lean into that and talk to their land databases and their UK databases and say, here is something that really is incomparable to anything that you would have experienced before. And there's an opportunity for you to go on, one of these holidays this summer. And what's really lovely about this is the certainty of it. We've got permission. It's starting next week. These holidays are going to run. So in a world of uncertainty around holidays, it's a really positive message for travel agents to really be able to get behind the fact that these UK cruises are operating and the guests will have an amazing experience on board.
Yeah, well, I wondered actually, I saw, obviously we heard Grant Shapps announce the green list on Friday, which was shorter than I think many people anticipated. And I saw a fair bit on social media of people saying, well, if people have now given up on their overseas holiday because their destination of choice or whatever didn't make the green list, this might give a boost to the UK, the staycations that you're running. I don't know whether you saw any uplift over the weekend, particularly, Tony.
Yeah, it's been a busy weekend. We've seen a bit of pickup, and I think coming into this week, with all of these things, the dust needs to settle a little bit, and I think people have a kind of an appreciation and they reflect on the news that they've got and see how things pan out. I think the challenge with the green list is not just the number of destinations that appear on it, but it's just the ongoing uncertainty. And I think that there is definitely it's appealing for customers to look at something and have some certainty after such a long period of uncertainty. And I think that's what's challenging with travel. And I think for cruise, it's really important that we get back to international cruising as well. So, all of the cruise lines are very keenly watching the traffic light process and the green lists and so on. But I think in the meantime, we're very pleased that we're able to operate these UK cruises, and we think they're going to be very appealing to guests. And, I do think it's just a fantastic opportunity for travel agents.
Absolutely. All right. Well, let's just pick up on then the international cruising, Andy. Perhaps you can sort of give us an update on that. I mean, a lot of lines have sort of banked on the Greek Isles. We've written a lot of stories about lines putting ships into the Eastern Med, and obviously hoping that Brits will be joining them. At the moment, that part of the world is not, on the list. So what's the situation for international cruising?
Yeah, and we're continuing to work with the government, with DFT, with the Foreign Office, etc., on international cruise. But I think one of the good things about the cruise business is that flexibility. So you've mentioned already, 18 ships around the UK this summer, and that shows that the cruise lines have been able to move ships into the UK waters to deal with that domestic demand. Similarly, when they put ships anywhere else in the world, it will reflect an international audience and be based on the best research they've done as to the people that they can attract to those ships. So whilst currently the green list is very restricted, there's our constant reviews as to what that green list looks like. At Clear, we're continuing to work with that Safe Future Travel Coalition led by ABTA, for example, which means that, again, we're supporting their calls for some greater clarity. But in terms of international cruise, it is very much a phased return to service that we've seen, and we'll see new markets and new ships operating soon.
What's the situation? Because, of course, it's not just about waiting for the green list, is it, with cruise? There's still the Foreign Office advice against international cruising. That's still in place by all accounts. So, will we see that lifted in line with more destinations going onto the list?
Well, I think we're continuing to work with DFT and the Foreign Office. These are daily conversations, and, we hope... we need to explain. I think if you go back over 14 months, there was very little awareness of the cruise industry or the cruise experience. But I think there's an understanding in government of the protocols that we have in place, of the importance to the UK economy. And we've seen since July that restart of cruising been done in a safe way. But we continue those conversations.
Okay. And Tony, in the US, there seemed to be a little bit of good, felt more positive the last couple of weeks. That they seem to have a bit of a breakthrough with the CDC. So is that something you're feeling more positive about now around sort of US cruising?
Yeah, I think so. I think we're still seeking a bit of clarity around the news that came out last week. But as you said, it felt like a bit of a positive step, or a step in the right direction. In the US, of course, they're also seeing some very strong vaccination rates and rollouts as well. So, some good progress being made there. I think, as Andy said, I think everywhere in the world we continue to work and collaborate with government on next steps and processes. And from a cruise industry perspective, this very much is around a phased return. And I think we're going to see that all around the world as travel internationally starts to return as well. So, we'll continue to work on that, I think, in every part of the world, and hopefully continue to take steps forward. And, it's hugely positive that in the next week, even if it's domestically only at the moment, that cruise ships will be leaving with guests on.
Yeah, and I'm sure I'll get lots of publicity, and hopefully that will raise even more awareness and get people thinking about it for this summer. All right, let's just, and we've talked a lot about COVID-related things. I do want to get on some other stuff, but just before we move on from that, just around the experience on board, just referring back to that Cruise.co survey again, they were said nearly half of the people they interviewed said they really wanted a buffet still. It's really popular, but I know that's one of the things that lines have been closing down because of some of the issues around some infection rates, etc., and doing more table service. But do you think the buffet is then gone for good? Do you think it's a temporary thing? Will it be back? And just perhaps talk about other sort of measures and experiences on board the ship.
So we can talk a little bit about the buffet experience. I think it's an interesting one because it's not gone forever. Just the way that it operates will change. So, you'll still be able to visit those areas of the ship, but just be served by crew rather than actually helping yourself. And I think, that's one of the key changes that is put in place to make that a more healthy process. And I think that's a lot of what happens with the guest experience will be the same. You're going to have the same great cruise experience, but there'll be additional protocols in place that make sure that we look after the health of our guests, of the crew, and of the destinations that we visit. But people will still be able to go to production shows, will still be able to enjoy fine dining around the ship. The bars experience, the spa, the swimming pools, all of the things that you would expect from a cruise. But it would be very strange if we just went back to exactly the way things were. And the same is going to be true of society in general. It's likely that there will be enhanced measures in place for some time into the future. And the same will be true on cruise ships.
And how much do you think the last 14 months or so will affect sort of just ship design or the way things operate on board? I mean, I know, Tony, for example, you have done a lot of work over the pandemic on your sort of technology, or ocean medallion technology, so that you don't have to touch so many things. And then we've talked about new ships coming to service with even more space, more outdoor space. So is that going to? I know we've got some ships that are just ready to come out of the shipyard, but in the future, do you think that we will be sort of that this pandemic situation will sort of affect the way that cruising changes in the future?
Yeah, I think so. I think everybody's expectations are changing, and I was watching Cruising with Jane McDonald last night, and there's people stepping into a cable car together, and it sort of felt really strange. And I think, that people's expectations are different now in terms of, where you want to gather in groups or how many times you're going to sanitize your hands through the day and that kind of thing. So I think as guest expectations change, the cruise industry will adapt to meet those expectations. And as you say, we've already seen that through the use of technology and through different processes and protocols. And I think that will continue, because one thing that I've learned about my 20 years in the cruise industry is that it continually changes and evolves to meet ever expanding guest requirements and guest experience needs. And the cruise industry will continue to evolve and continue to be successful in that way.
Okay. All right then. So Andy, tell us what we've got to look forward to in the cruise sector. I mean, we've got new ships coming down the line. We've got new terminals being built, even one in Southampton. So give us an idea of what we've got to look forward to.
A lot. Yeah, and as you say, the ship build program hasn't stopped. It hasn't been paused. We're continuing to see new ships announced, but also new ships coming off production. We've got Iona christening, of course, coming up this weekend, and then Virtuosa out of that brand new terminal in Southampton. Lots of new ships in the UK, which is really exciting this summer. And then, as international travel opens up, so too will international cruise. But I think, to Tony's point, I think the great thing about the cruise industry is that continued investment in the guest experience, that continued investment in technology, new ships, new dining experiences, new entertainment, new itineraries. We've got a great growth in things like river cruise and expedition and small ship, but actually, the larger ship section as well. So lots of choice still for our customers, lots of choice for our travel agent partners. And, as travel opens up, I think we have that optimism now that things are moving in the right direction.
And are you confident that will continue, given, so all the lines have had to borrow, they're hugely in debt because of the situation. We know that they're going to have, quite a lot, to get through. And I wonder, do you think that will impact on how much investment they put into the future? Will it impact on prices they charge? Because it's a fairly difficult and tough situation that all the lines are in.
Yeah, and it's been a tough 14 months, not just for the cruise industry and for the cruise lines themselves, but also for our travel agent and tour operator partners, for airlines, for hoteliers, etc. The travel industry has been hit really hard, but actually one of the exciting things I think about travel and cruise is how resilient it has proved to be. And I think that's demonstrated by the restart of domestic cruising next week. I think it's shown by the continuing arrival of new ships. And I think it shows just how great that pent-up demand is for people to get back cruising, get back traveling again. And as a sector, we're ready to restart whenever it is safe to do so.
Yeah, and you mentioned agents there, absolutely key. So, Andy, what kind of things has Clear got on the horizon? Because people will have been missing all your conferences and all the events and things. I know you've done a lot of training online. And I should ask Tony as well, because, Tony, you've stayed on and done an extra service as chair, haven't you, during this pandemic? So, but I guess you're coming shortly to an end of your tenure there. So just give us an idea of what Clear's got coming up in the rest of this year and beyond.
Yeah, and we're very grateful to our travel agent partners who've engaged with us over the past 14 months. You know, their time and investment in learning and still connecting with the cruise industry is really important and been a really important part of our restart that's coming and starting next week. Certainly this week we'll be launching a new toolbox for travel agents. We'll have details of the protocols that their customers can expect, plus some of those additional background information so that they can understand why there are certain rules and some of the decisions behind that. So that's being launched this week. We have more virtual events coming up because I think we're still in that era where virtual events will still be important. And actually they'll probably be important for the next coming years as well. I think we have in many ways made that mind shift, but it is great to be talking about in-person events, and we'll be announcing details of some in-person events in the coming weeks. But it is nice, for example, to have talked about an in-person event for next year in March for River Cruise, for example. So we'll continue to build our program and reflect, I hope, what our travel agents are looking for.
Yeah, and Tony, last word from you then. I mean, it's been one hell of a tenure, hasn't it, as chair of CLIA in this period?
Yeah, it really has. And, you know, I was, normally you do it for 2 years, and, you know, we worked together to extend that to 3 years. And that was before the pandemic that we agreed to do all of that. So I think I feel like I've well and truly done my time as chair. And as you say, coming to the end of that tenure now. But it's been, you know, this year actually, I think has been a fantastic learning experience for the whole industry. And, you know, in terms of sort of crisis management, liaison with government, you know, hats off to the whole CLIA team really for doing, you know, a very good job of keeping cruise at the forefront, and you know, collaborating with various different bodies and continuing to move the conversation and the debate forward. And I think, you know, the fact that we're returning to domestic cruising next week is largely because of some of the work that CLIA's done in the background to make sure that we had, you know, a framework in place, that there was agreement with government. And, you know, there's been a lot of people across the whole CLIA team and across the cruise lines that have contributed to that. And, you know, it's been great to be part of it. And really hats off to Andy and the team for the job they've done coordinating that and leading that through to successful conclusion and onwards to international travel, we hope.
Yeah, well, absolutely. I echo that. And finally, it's still good news for the future, isn't it? Your bookings are for future seasons, albeit, you know, we know it's still some uncertainty around this year, but and I think people are, the last trends I saw, people are spending a little bit more money, perhaps they're going for a bit longer. So we have got some good trends to look forward to.
Yeah, absolutely. 2022 has been really strong, and you know, the new product that's been on sale through cruise lines for 2023 and even beyond that is really booked well. And as you say, I think, you know, people have really missed travel in the last 15 months or so, and I think it's encouraged many of our guests to think about those bucket list destinations that perhaps, you know, they were holding off or waiting or saving up for, and thinking actually now is the time, you know, as I return to travel, do I really want to tick off that big bucket list items? And I think cruise is really well positioned for that, with destinations like Australia, Alaska, South America, you know, as well as the traditional cruising destinations like the Caribbean and the Med. So we're seeing really strong forward bookings, and I think, you know, guests are just very keen to get back on board and to start having that true cruising and traveling experience again.
Brilliant. All right, well, we will see that next week, which is really exciting. We wish you all the best as an industry, and thank you very much today to Andy and to Tony from CLIA. Thank you very much indeed.